Hello everybody, Bruce here with a review of Chapter 2. It's kind of like a lecture / review, so let's get started. Chapter 2 and Module 2 in this course is going to cover how to code, test, and validate a web page. Now, here are some of the objectives. The applied objectives are going to be use a text editor like Visual Studio Code to create and edit HTML and CSS files. Now, if you watch the videos from Module 1, I demonstrated in those videos on how to set up Visual Studio Code, how to do a lot of things that are covered in Chapter 2 in the book. Also, the textbook uses the Adobe Brackets editor, and we are using the Microsoft Visual Studio Code editor. So in the chapter, ignore the material on brackets. All right. Second, test an HTML document that's stored on your computer or a local server by loading it into a browser using Live Server. Again, this was covered in Module 1 towards the end of the installation videos for Visual Studio Code. Third, how to validate HTML documents using a validation service. We're also going to do that for CSS. You should be able to describe the use of the head and body elements in an HTML document. Describe these types of HTML tags, opening, closing, and empty tags. Describe the use of attributes within HTML tags. Fourth, describe the use of HTML comments and whitespace. And number 5, describe the components of a CSS style rule. Number 6, describe the use of these types of CSS selectors: type, ID, and class. 7, explain how and why you would start a new HTML or CSS file from a template. Number 8, describe 3 ways to run a web page and 1 way to retest a web page after you've changed the source code for the page. And again, that one is something that was also included in Module 1 in the installation videos. And the last one, number 9, describe 2 benefits of validating HTML and CSS files. So let's start by talking about the structure of an HTML5 document. All right. So this is the basic structure of any HTML5 web page. We have what's called the document type declaration. That's that first line that you see that says doc type HTML with the exclamation point. What that is doing is telling your browser, when you load this page up, that the document that it's about to receive and be asked to display or render is in fact an HTML document, hence the doc type HTML. And yes, HTML means HTML5, just so to be clear here, all right? So HTML is actually HTML5. The next is the opening HTML tag, and that's the beginning of what we call the document tree. And that's on line 1, we said, hey, browser, you're about to receive an HTML type document. And the next tag, HTML, is the start of that HTML. So that's why we have this opening HTML tag there, all right? Now, at the top, the first thing inside of the HTML tag is typically the head section or the head element right there. And that's going to contain things like the title of the page, a link to a cascading style sheet, as well as other things. And then you have the body element, and notice how you have an opening body tag and a closing body tag. And I forgot to mention that you have an opening head tag and a closing head tag. The closing tags begin with the /. Now, within the body tag, that's going to be all the things you see on the web page, the content, the pictures of kittens and dogs, whatever is on your web page. And then you have a closing HTML tag that says to the browser, that's it, I ain't got any more HTML. All right. So here is a simple HTML5 document with a little bit more of things filled in. And if you'll notice in the head section, we have this thing called meta character set UTF-8. That's telling the browser what particular character set to use to display the content on this web page. And UTF-8 can literally display almost every language that you can think of. Next, in the head section, you have an opening title tag and a closing title tag, and that says, what it says right there, right? And that information is shown in the tab bar of the browser, or on Windows, if you haven't minimized, it shows there on the taskbar. And then we have the closing head tag, and then the start of the body tag, the opening body tag. And inside of the body tag, we see we have an H1 tag with a bunch of text and a closing H1 tag. And the H1 tag specifies the largest heading size that you can have in an HTML document. If you've used Microsoft Word or Google Docs, you have the same type of thing, right? That large or the largest heading. And so there are 6 different levels of headings in HTML, H1 through H6, okay? The next, we have an opening paragraph tag with a line of text, and then at the end, a closing paragraph tag. And then we have another paragraph tag with some text and another closing paragraph tag. And typically, you'd put more than one sentence, but this is a basic demonstration of a simple HTML5 document. And then the third paragraph starts with a P tag, and then it has what we call an anchor link, an anchor tag, which has additional attributes that specify where you want to direct this web page to go if the user clicks on the words speaker information. And then you have this closing anchor tag. So speaker information gets highlighted, right, as being a link, and if someone clicks on any one of those 2 words, right, it's going to direct them to speakers.html. And then we have the closing paragraph tag, the closing body tag, and the closing HTML tag. So when you work with tags, there, as you can see here in the slide, there are 2 elements with opening and closing tags. You saw here H1 and the paragraph, right? Opening H1, closing H1 tag, opening paragraph tag, and a closing paragraph tag. And believe it or not, there are things that we call empty tags, where you do not have a corresponding closing break tag. Closing end tag, right? A closing tag, okay? So the BR tag, which is a break, like you hitting enter on your keyboard or return, and then the image tag below that is a self-closing tag or an empty tag, okay? So just note that BR and IMG don't have corresponding closing tags. There are a lot of other tags like that, but I just want to show you elements that have pairs of opening and closing tags and empty tags or self-closing tags that don't have a corresponding closing tag. Now, it's important that when you nest tags, right, that you get the order correct. So in this example, under correct nesting, we start with a paragraph tag, and then we say order your copy. And then we have this I tag, which will italicize text on the screen, and a closing I tag, right? So today, exclamation point, will get italicized. And then we have the closing paragraph tag to close out the opening paragraph tag that we started with. Incorrect nesting is when you don't get the order of the closing tags correct. So you can see here, we're closing the paragraph before we're closing the italicized today exclamation point text. So be careful of that, all right? So how to code an opening tag with attributes. Now, attributes are additional things that get added to tags to help provide more information. For example, the opening tag here, this anchor tag that has one attribute, that attribute href contains information as to where the browser should go if a user clicks on that text that's going to follow that anchor tag. The next tag shows an anchor tag, right, with three attributes, right? It defines href, which is where the page is going to go if a user clicks on that anchor link. The next one is a title, and the third is a class. And a class is going to help you present or use color and various things in your CSS file to control the presentation of that anchor link in the browser. All right. So here is an empty tag with attributes, right? This is the image tag, which we spoke about earlier. And it includes a source attribute, which defines the image source that the browser is to display. And then it provides what we call alt text that says Murac logo. And that's going to, number one, help people who are using screen readers who cannot see the logo that you're trying to present to them. And it's also going to show if you hover your mouse over that image. Okay. How to code a Boolean attribute. When we talk about forms, you'll like a form you fill out. Maybe it's for registering for school or buying something online. Sometimes you have these different form controls, radio buttons, check boxes, text inputs, etc. And this particular Boolean attribute means that this checkbox that has this name attribute of mail list is checked by default. You ever go somewhere on the web and you're filling out a form and a particular item is already checked for you? Well, that's how that gets done. Okay? Attributes for identifying HTML elements. You'll learn that you have different ways to identify different things inside of your HTML. Number one, to help you with styling in CSS. And the second is some of these things get used by a language called JavaScript that is not really taught in this class, but it is taught, I actually teach it at Clark. It tells you how to add interactivity to a web page. In fact, we will talk a little bit about it in this class, but IDs typically get assigned to a specific HTML element. In this case, it's what we call a div element. And you can only have one ID, you can only have one element on a page with a specific ID. Just like you have a student ID and only one person at the school can have that student ID. Here's another one that uses an anchor tag, and it has a class called navlink. And as you'll learn, you use classes in your style sheets, just like you can use IDs as well, to say, I want this particular anchor link to be styled using this class that's defined, nav_link, in the CSS style sheet. Okay? Now, here is, let's talk about comments, how you add additional information to a web page for humans. Okay, humans who may be editing your HTML file in the future, and your CSS files for that matter. These comments do not get displayed to people through the web browser. You have to go in and view the page source in order to see them. Note that the first comment, the first one in yellow, is just a comment. It talks about this document displays the homepage for the website. Comments can span multiple lines, and notice that the second comment in yellow, is commenting out a bunch of HTML code, because sometimes you may want to experiment and you may want to try some code, and if it works, great. If it doesn't work, you may not want to erase it. You may just want to block it out so it's not rendering. The web browser is receiving it, but it's ignoring it because it's encompassed in that closing comment tag, and the opening comment tag and the closing comment tag. Okay. Now let's talk about cascading style sheets for a second. It's really important to know what you see on this slide here. In a CSS file, by the way, we're not going to be putting CSS in our HTML files. We will be placing a link to the style sheet in our HTML file, but all of our CSS will be external CSS. Yes, I know you can have embedded CSS and inline CSS in an HTML document, but I want you to place all of your CSS for this class in a separate style sheet. On the screen, you can see here that we have something called a selector. And a selector is going to target what you want to have styled in your HTML. Now, you're all saying, hey Bruce, the H1 tags, where are the brackets? Well, we don't place those brackets inside of the CSS. We just place the tag name, which is H1. And then we have these braces, or I call them seagulls. And inside the seagulls, we will place one or more declarations that help define position information, style information, etc., that will be applied to the selector. And you'll note too that the selector that you see on the screen says H1, and if we have one H1 tag or 50, all of them will be styled using this style rule. Okay. Now, a declaration is made up of property value pairs. In this case, the color followed by a colon specified by a value, and the end of the declaration will always have a semicolon after it. And again, you may have color, you may have padding, margin, background color, font dash size. There are all of these various properties that you're going to learn about in this class with corresponding values that will get applied to a selector. All right. And in Canvas, I placed a link in one of the units to a handy dandy, yeah, I said handy dandy, web page that'll help demonstrate these terms that I'm using: selector, property, value, rule, declaration. So be sure to find that link and bookmark it. You're going to need it. Okay, so here is a simple CSS document. We'll start off with the first 4 lines, and this is a CSS comment. It happens to have a lot of asterisks in it, but all you really need are a / and 1 asterisk, and then a asterisk and a / to close the comment. And this is a good practice, right? They put a description and an author in there. That's a multi-line CSS comment. And then you have, let's see, body as the selector. So what this selector is saying, hey, in that HTML document that's linked to me, the style sheet, set the background color to that color right there. Okay, it says it's a shade of orange. And notice too how you can place comments to the right of a declaration, just like I did right there. And the next selector is an H1, and it's having a color applied. H2 has a font style and a border bottom that's 3 pixels solid. I don't know what that color is off the top of my head. And then the one after that saying, hey, any unordered lists that are on the web page, I want the list style type to use square bullets rather than the default round ones. All right? So notice that format, and notice how you have the selector, the opening curly brace, and then on the next line you have indented the property value pairs. Okay, that's really important, and you'll see in one of the tutorials in Module 2 that I take great care to format my CSS neatly. All right, so notice in here it says elements that can be selected by type, ID, or class. Notice the H1 element has a class of base underscore color. Okay, notice that right there. And then the unordered list is saying has this thing called ID equals links. And then there's another paragraph tag that has an ID of copyright and a class of base color. Let me just see on the next slide. Yeah, here they are right here. So I'm going to go back and forth between these two slides. So H1 class base color. Let's look at the style sheet. Now, look at the bottom of the slide. You see something dot base underscore color. Dot is how you specify a class selector in CSS. So look here, class equals base underscore color, and on the CSS file, dot base underscore color. You got that? All right, write that down. Next, you have UL ID equals links. So if we go here, notice how, actually, do we have, I guess we don't. The book didn't do that. Typically you'd have, let's do the copyright. All right, let me do the copyright. They have one for the copyright. So here it says ID equals copyright. So if we go to our CSS, notice that we don't have a dot for an ID, but we have a hash sign for IDs. And you can only apply an ID to one element on a page. Okay, that's why I like classes, because I can reuse them over and over again. So go through that, and if you have any questions, just ask questions. Okay. And notice for the copyright, it says font size 75% of the normal font size, and then I want you to align the text to the right. Okay. Yeah, having fun. So this is what that page would look like viewed in a browser. The HTML page coupled with the style sheet. Got it? All right. Now, we're not going to cover the information on brackets. Brackets is another HTML editor made by Adobe. And honestly, Visual Studio Code rules the roost, as they say now. So we're using that. All right. So I left the slides in there, but yeah. All right. I know this slide here has a question on the quiz about it, but common HTML and CSS errors. Even if you're a professional like myself, I make mistakes. I'm human. I can't get everything right all the time. And it's really important, while your web browser will do its best job to determine what you meant in your HTML and CSS coding, it's best to have it perfect. And the HTML validation services that we're going to talk about shortly help you do and check your work. They won't fix your work for you, but they'll try to direct you to tell you what's wrong. So common HTML coding errors. You have an opening tag without a closing tag. You have a misspelled tag or attribute name. You have quotation marks that aren't paired. Maybe you started a quotation mark and you never put a second one. Incorrect file references in link, image, or anchor elements. Common errors that you can make in CSS are you have braces that are not paired, or maybe you forgot to put in a closing brace. Maybe you forgot a semicolon at the end of a declaration. Maybe you misspelled a property name or a value name. and ID or class names that don't match the names used in the HTML. Now, that last one, ID or class names that don't match names used in the HTML, I don't know of a validation service that's going to help you do that, but just know that's something that can happen. All right. Brackets with a vertical split screen. Again, you can do split screen kind of development work in Visual Studio Code. There's nothing in this unit that talks about it, but we'll get into it in a future module. Okay. Live preview, again, we do that in Visual Studio Code. It was covered in Module 1. Go back and look at those installation videos for VS Code, whether you're on a Windows PC or a Macintosh. Yep. So the way that I want you to test all of your code is using Live Server Preview. When you're developing locally, when you do move your code and CSS and images up to the Clark web server, I'm going to want you to actually go to the URL of your work on the Clark web server and test it out, because the Clark web server is case sensitive and it's going to not render things that don't match the case that you gave something like maybe a CSS style sheet name, an image name, a file name, and things like that. All right. So with the Live Server plugin that I had you installed for Visual Studio Code, you don't ever really have to refresh the Chrome web browser because it's going to do it auto-magically for you. All right. So we're going to skip over this for now. I want to introduce you to, and there's a video in Canvas in this module that shows you how to use the World Wide Web Consortium, better known as W3C, to validate your HTML code. So go and watch that video for HTML and CSS. I think it's in one video. I'm not using the Visual Studio Code editor in that particular video. It's an older video I made, but the information on how to, use the particular service for both HTML validation and CSS validation is still relevant. Okay. So go and look up those two, go watch that video and bookmark the HTML and CSS validation services, the URLs. And again, notice here how it's telling you that there was an error on this particular CSS file. All right. All right. So that's all I have for Module 2 as far as the slides go for the book. I want you to go through all the material in the book. I want you to go through the tutorial because I think you may need to do something with that tutorial as an assignment, but I'll let you figure that out. Thanks for watching, and if you have any questions, please let me know, and thanks for watching this video.